Welcome to the podcast. It's the magical holidays. Time for Joe watching 60 Christmas movies in 60 days. Why, you might ask? Because it sounds like a crazy task to be watching 60 Christmas movies in 60 days. It'll be struggle, no I won't lie. By the halfway point I will lose my mind, but with your support I'm gonna be fine. So let's have a blast on this Christmas time. Join me now and let's find out about today's Christmas movie. Was it good or bad? Happy or sad? Is there another dead mom and dad? Let's get to it with no delay. It's your old pal Joe and he's happy to say welcome to Joe watches 60 Christmas movies in 60 days.
How's it going, everybody? It's me, your old pal Joe, and welcome to episode 55 of Joe Watches 60 Christmas Movies in 60 Days. Before we get to today's movie, we must, of course, acknowledge and bow in the direction of my good friends over at Third Eye Comics. Third Eye Comics, the sole sponsor and the sole reason that this season has existed, and if it ends in a good way, if I get everything done in time, I'm going to give them full credit for the inspiration to do all of this in a timely manner. Third Eye Comics, they're your headquarters, your haven, your home for comics, graphic novels, gaming, movies, music, TV, snacks, good times. They have a lockdown on good times. So please be sure to visit one of their stores in the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area, or if you must, you can always go to shop.thirdeyecomics.com and order something that will be delivered to your house via the means of Christmas magic. That's shop.thirdeyecomics.com. Let's talk about today's movie. Today's movie is Christmas at the Chateau. We start at a chateau. We hear narration from our main character, Brooke, who says her family has been celebrating at this giant house, aka a chateau, for over 100 years. The family has owned it for the house for over 100 years, but more specifically, over the last 60 of years, it's also been a bed and breakfast, which has invited people in to help celebrate the Christmas season with the family. We see a bunch of people enjoying a Christmas party in the main space of the chateau while Brooke works in the kitchen. Brooke, again, is our main character. Brooke's dad has a tradition where he dances with all three of his daughters each Christmas, so he drags Brooke out of the kitchen when it's her turn. There are three daughters. There's one that appears a little bit older than Brooke, and there's one that appears to be a lot younger than Brooke. And we'll learn more about them as the story moves forward. As Brooke dances with her dad, we find out that their mom has passed away. Brooke's dad asks Brooke to promise not to let this chateau run her life the way it kind of ran theirs. She promises. Fast forward 2 years later. Brooke talks to us again more about the chateau and how it's in St. Joseph, Missouri. We see Brooke tending to the various guests that are there. Suddenly we shift over to another narrator. He says his name is Grant, and he introduces us to his son Levi, who's around 7 years old. We see a montage of Grant letting his son help pick out his business clothes for the day, and then we're back to Brooke at the bed and breakfast. We see her dad is walking around with a cane, and I guess that explains why Brooke is so heavily involved in running the bed and breakfast now. He stops by to tell Brooke how proud he is of her. Brooke says she has to head out. As she walks, she passes right by Grant, our other narrator. She passes him on the street. We then see them out and about and intersecting a few times without noticing one another. We eventually see Brooke arrive at her second job at the library. And then we see Grant arrive at his job at the bank. Brooke narrates more and tells us Christmas brings both the best and the worst out of people. We then see Brooke and Grant getting coffee at the same coffee shop. And in narration, we hear each of them talking about reading. Brooke talks about how reading is a pastime for her, but Grant talks about it more like a means to an end to glean information. When the opening of the movie finally ends, we settle on Brooke at the library. Her worker friends insist she needs to meet a guy. Over to Grant. Some boss of Grant's talks about who he wants to take over as the VP, and he thinks Grant might be the guy to do it. They're counting on him. He says he's got this. Back to the library, we find out Brooke's work friends have set her up with some guy. The guy walks up and he speaks in a very silly manner, and now I regret this movie. Okay, so look, most of this movie is fine, but Brooke's entire work life with her wacky coworkers and the wacky guy that they set her up on a date with are just unbearable for me. I just could not get into them at all, and they made me dislike this movie greatly, even though they're barely in it. Anyway, the guy asks her out in a silly manner, and she accepts Cut to Grant taking his son Levi to the library. When they check out, guess who checks them out? That's right, it's Brooke. She jokes around with Levi, and it seems like maybe there's some flirting going on between Brooke and Grant. Cut to Grant playing video games with Levi. Levi, who is 7, tells his dad that he's worried his dad is lonely. Back to Brooke and her work buddy Renee in line at a coffee shop. Brooke goes on and on about why she doesn't like fast coffee. She talks about the artistry of the traditional, slowly made coffee. And at this point in my notes, I write, the writer loves their own words. This scene is so overwritten, with so much banter put into this scene, that leads nowhere, and we learn almost nothing about these characters. It was just like, oh, okay, so this is the writer's opinion on coffee. Over at the bank, Grant denies an old lady a loan. When she's upset, he says he can send her to some guy at another bank and have him delay all of her loan payments until her business is doing better and she's happy. But then a guy that Grant works with acts like Grant was totally ruthless with this woman, and I'm confused. Did he help her or did he not help her? Grant, regardless, seems like he feels bad for what he did. Back at the coffee shop, Brooke is hanging out with her buddy Renee when she finds a book on the ground next to her feet. She asks her buddy if it's hers. It's not. Well, I can tell you this. We know we've seen that book before if you're watching the movie, because earlier we saw Grant reading that very book at the coffee shop. So it's his book. It's called How to Make Great Friends and Lasting Relationships. Renee, her buddy, Brooke's buddy, describes it as a self-help romance book, and I'm like, what makes it a romance novel? Anyway, she says that sounds like Brooke, and Brooke agrees, like someone who would be interested in a self-help romance novel. Brooke thinks that this might be a sign. She then notices there's a name and phone number written on the inside. It says Rudy. She wonders who Rudy might be. Cut to her texting the number, but then changing her mind, but then writing the text again. Hello, Rudy. You don't know me, but I found your book in a coffee shop. Let me know if you want it back. Grant immediately gets a text, so it's his number in the book. But his name isn't Rudy, is it? He realizes he left his book at the cafe. He texts back and asks where they might meet so he can get it back. But then, when we cut to Brooke, she reads aloud a different message. It's like she does not respond to the bit about when can I get the book back. And then they start texting back and forth. She never answered his question. As they banter back and forth, eventually he asks for her name. She never sends it. She ends up calling herself Sparks. I don't remember why. Maybe because sparks are flying. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a family nickname. I don't know. It's hard to keep track of what's happening because of how this is edited. I'm not saying they did a terrible job of editing it. I'm just saying it was hard for me to keep track of what was happening because of how it was edited. They keep going back and forth. At the end of the exchange, he says it was nice meeting her over text, and she seems like he's someone that he would like getting to know. This scene was a bit bewildering to me because there's a bit in the back and forth where he explains that Rudy is just a nickname of his. But he doesn't explain what his real name is. Otherwise, it'd be easier for these two people to put the pieces together. But the thing that is never explained in this movie is why he wrote his nickname and phone number in a book that he was reading. And that seems to be a key part of this entire plot. We then cut to an airport where 3 people get off a private jet. This is very foreboding in a very wacky way. They immediately go to the bank where Grant has a presentation for them. They show off different possible, very fancy homes for these people to buy. The man cuts him off and says he doesn't care how fancy these places are. He wants a steal, and he wants it now. Well, Grant says, okay, how about this one? He shows off a slide showing the Chateau. That's right, Brooke's house. We find out that the loan for the Chateau is in default, and the owners don't even know it yet. They can legally claim their property whenever they want. They plan to foreclose on December 24th. The visitors, who again are comically mean, are very happy. We see Grant mailing the foreclosure notice. So it's not a foreclosure, it's a threat to foreclose. Cut to Brooke's younger sister arriving back home. I think it's her younger sister. It could be her older sister. They're approximately the same age. I couldn't tell you. Anyway, Brooke is not happy to see her sister. Her sister's name is Katie. We find out in the last 2 years, her sister has kind of gone out on her own, has left Brooke to man the Chateau by herself, because we saw her dad with a cane. There's also the younger sister, like I mentioned earlier. The younger sister's name is Lizzie. Lizzie's about 13. Anyway, we quickly find out Katie has been away for personal reasons and usually comes back looking for money. Brooke asks how much this time, and Katie says she's not there for money, she's there to stay. Brooke is not happy to hear this. Katie says she has just as much a right to this house as Brooke does. Brooke tells her to be out the next day. Later, Katie is going through mail and notices a letter from the bank. It apparently says they have a balloon payment payment due of $30,000, or else the chateau will be foreclosed upon. She immediately goes to the Brooke immediately goes to the bank and confronts the man who mailed it her, Grant. She's then surprised to see it's the dad from the library who did this to her. He asks to speak to her in his office. She says, "Can you explain what this means?" And he says, "Yes, okay, years ago, your dad took out a loan that would conclude with a balloon payment. It is now time for that payment to be made, or the bank will have to find ways to recoup its losses." She asks if she can set up a payment plan. She cannot. The payment must be made by December 24th, or the bank will claim the property on December 25th. She reads him the riot act and storms out. Afterwards, some bank buddies, including his boss, congratulate Grant on sticking to his guns. Grant feels terrible, though. He talks about how he liked her, the lady from the library, and now he has to do this to her. His one buddy says, "You should just focus on the woman who found your book instead. She seems nice." But then Grant notices Brooke left behind a necklace. Brooke seeks solace with her work buddies about the terrible news that she's endured. Renee, her work buddy, says she'll figure something out. Cut to Brooke on the date with that guy that her friend set her up with. Even though he's cartoonishly awkward and weird, she has a nice time. Then we see her tossing and turning in bed. She decides to text the guy whose book she found. She says she might need to ask his advice on something. He says, "I might need your help with something too." She asks what she should do because it feels like the people who should be looking out for her are actually plotting to hurt her. And I wonder, what the fuck does that mean in the context of this movie? Who is plotting to hurt her? The bank? Yep, you got it. Wait, are you expecting the bank to look out for you? Are you expecting Grant, one father who goes to the library that you work at, to look out for you? Or are you expecting... What are you talking about? The people I expect to look out for me are actually plotting to hurt me? What are you talking about? Grant replies and says in earnest words, "Whenever I'm confronted with an enemy, I befriend them and learn their weakness." Who the fuck is confronted with enemies often enough that you have a plot on how to deal with them? Whenever I'm confronted with an enemy. What are you talking about? She thinks that advice sounds great. She then asks what he needs help with. He says he struggles with loneliness. Just him and his son and no females to argue with. They go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. They both settle on fighting for what's worth fighting for. That's what they should both do. Also, she told him her name is Sparks. Cut to Brooke arriving back in Grant's office. She brought with her a shoebox filled with $3,000 and some dollars. She says that this is all she can get together. And she also quotes a lot of literature, a lot of, fancy lines of literature. I guess that's supposed to intimidate him. Then we cut to her at the library talking to her buddies. She says they're going to set water bottles, like the kind you would have in an office water bottle. Set them around the city with a sign that says, "Saving the Chateau," or, help to save the Chateau. Her work buddies think this has promise. We get a montage of Brooke and Grant doing things like Brooke reading Grant's book, mixed with people donating to the various water bottles. When the montage is over, we see the local paper has covered the Chateau possibly closing. Cut to Grant's boss asking Grant if he's seen the story in the newspaper. Grant has, but he isn't sure what to do about it. His boss has an idea. He says, "Why don't we get them to invest in a hedge fund, and then tell them we'll use they can use those donations to help make money in the hedge fund." It doesn't really make sense to me. We're going to move on. It'll come up again in a second. He tells Grant to get Brooke to sign up for this hedge fund. Cut to Grant arriving at the Chateau. First he meets Katie and Lizzie, and then he finds Brooke, who is very curt with him. She doesn't want to talk to him. He decides to continue pestering her with questions about her life, like what it was like growing up in the Chateau. Suddenly she's very nice to him. He offers her a dance, and she takes him up on the dance. They dance and chat about the Chateau. Eventually she asks why he came today. He explains that he might know of a way to help her make money faster. He asks her to come by the bank the next day. She will. They sort of flirt here. Cut to them meeting back at the bank. Things are pleasant. He asks how nice about how nice the house is. I guess, like, "Wow, your house sure is nice." I don't remember. Anyway, his boss shows up. He says all Brooke needs to do is to take the money that she's raised so far, deposit it in a hedge fund, triple her money, and then cash out. Then she can pay the balloon payment. And I write in my notes, "What?" She asks Grant if this sounds like the best thing to do. He says it just might work. She signs the paperwork and the boss acts like it's all taken care of. She promises to come by later and deposit the money they have. Grant is happy. We get a montage of both Grant and Brooke being happy with their respective family and workplaces. We then get texting between Grant and Brooke, but her as Sparks and Grant as Rudy. Remember, this version of their relationship started when she found his book. They have yet to move beyond texting, even though they know each other are nearby since they both went to the same cafe. She does ask if she can hold on to the book a little while longer because she thinks it's a good luck charm. We see her depositing the money that she's raised into the bank account. We then get more texting. He mentions how he loves having a female to argue with, and it's just so bizarre. The way he talks about women. It's not inherently insulting, it's just super duper weird. We then get more montages of them being happy. There's still a half hour left. Cut to Brooke and Renee getting coffee. Remember, Renee's her work buddy. Brooke's card is declined. She goes to the bank and they say that her account has been frozen. She immediately goes to Grant and asks what's going on. He's confused and looks at her account. He doesn't understand why there aren't any funds there. She thinks he planned this. She storms out. He pleads, we can figure this out. She says she wants nothing to do with him. She trusted him and now has lost everything. She leaves. Cut to Grant confronting his boss. He doesn't ask what happened, but does accuse his boss of orchestrating things. His boss tells him to let it go and not lose focus on his career. Grant leaves. So, okay. Now that we know the conclusion of the hedge fund part, what the fuck really happened in that? What is going on? So she deposits money into a hedge fund, which somehow then freezes her regular bank account? And what happened to the money? Is it gone? Was it lost like in a bad investment? It's never explained in the movie. What I told you is everything they say. Anyway, cut to Grant. Oh, no, that was him confronting his boss. We see Brooke texting Grant as Rudy and Sparks and asking to meet him. He says he'd like to meet her too. They meet at the coffee shop where she found the book. She nervously walks up to the coffee shop and then sees Grant waiting for her inside. She realizes it must be his book. She bursts into tears. We then see Grant get up to throw something away from his table. When he gets back to his table, the book is waiting for him along with a note that says, I'm sorry. He races out of the cafe and looks around. He's sad. He doesn't know who left the book. We get another montage of Brooke and Grant living their lives. Cut to Brooke on another date with the guy that she was set up with before. He says he's in love with someone else and can't see her anymore. Brooke loses it in the middle of the restaurant, calling herself a failure. Brooke then goes home and tells her sister she lost the chateau. She heads to her bedroom. Later, her dad checks on her. She tells him that everything she touches breaks. He tells her to lean on the people around her. He also tells her he'll always be proud of her. Cut to Grant bringing his son to Brooke's house. Don't know why. There's a party going on. Grant finds Brooke there and tries to joke with her. Brooke wants nothing to do with him. He says he cares about her. She says she wants nothing to do with him. He says there's something between them. She said she'd never be with someone like him. She blames him for tricking her. He says it's not his fault. Well, then whose fault is it? What happened to the money, Grant? Then Grant says the woman he loves hates his guts. She then says he probably conned someone into sleeping with him to get his son, and then she left him. He gets very serious and says that his wife died of cancer. Now Brooke feels bad for what she said. He then says he got her something and gives her a package. Cut to Brooke's sisters packing up their belongings. We then get flashbacks to scenes from earlier in the movie as Brooke walks through the halls of the chateau. She then comes across her dad sitting in a dark room by himself. She talks to him. He talks to her. That's when we find out he's actually dead. He died in the interim 2 years. Brooke's sister finds her crying and says it's time. She needs to let her dad go. We then get a flashback to Brooke and her little sister Lizzie watching her dad have a heart attack and presumably dying. This is all very sad. Then we see her dad walk into the darkness. Brooke hugs her sister and thanks her for being there. Katie, Brooke's possibly older sister, possibly younger sister, has the gift from Grant that Grant left behind. I guess she never opened it. She tells her to open it. It's the necklace that she lost. Then Katie says, he really cares for you, Brooke. You need to go to find him. Cut to Grant packing up his belongings in his home. We hear a text message between Grant and Sparks. He talks about how when they first started texting, he thought she was the reason he was brought to this town, but now he's not sure. He then adds that he's leaving town now. We see Brooke looking for him at the library and the bank. When she checks the bank, his old boss shows her a letter of resignation he turned in. Back to text messages, Grant says that he's going to leave his book for her to find outside of the cafe where they both almost met. Maybe it'll remind her of better days. Before Brooke can finish reading the text, her phone dies. She runs to the cafe. We get a lot of running from Brooke as she covers tons of territory. Eventually she falls hard to the ground, but she gets up and keeps running. Remember, her phone is dead. Why? Because of the movie, that's why. She gets to the cafe but finds it closed. She looks down and sees the book that was left for her outside of the cafe leaning against the wall. She picks it up and holds it tight in her arms. But then Grant and Levi, his kid, come walking around the corner. He can't believe it was Brooke who had the book all along. "It's you," he says. "I can't believe you were Sparks." He says he was coming back to leave some free coffee passes for her. It was one of those things where if you drank like X number of cups, you got a free cup of coffee. And he had been coming to the cafe a lot to try to see her once he knew that she left the book for him. Whatever. He was leaving those passes for her so she could get the free cups of coffee since he was leaving town, and as a romantic gesture, I presume. So that's what he was coming back to the book for. She says that he really hurt her bad, and she can't forgive him for that. But losing everything has shown her what's really important to her. She's not the house. And then she says she wants to hate him, but she can't. He gives her a hug and says that he has her. We fade out and then back on a sunny day. Brooke narrates the end of the movie. We find out the guy who bought the house from the bank, remember the villainous people from earlier in the movie, that guy got arrested for some sort of fraud thing, and everything he owned went up for auction, and Brooke and her family ended up buying the chateau back for pennies on the dollar. And her and Grant ended up getting married there. We then see the wedding taking place. Then we see Grant and Brooke have their first dance. The end. That is Christmas at the Chateau. Do not recommend. There's some fine performances in this, but between the wacky work buddies and just the lack of total sense between what was the earlier thing. Well, there's the part about the money that really bugs me. But then there's something else earlier that really bothered me too, and I cannot remember it, and I'm sorry. I wish I could. I'm looking through my notes. I got nothing. There was something else earlier that didn't make any sense. So whatever. That's the end of the Christmas at the Chateau. Thank you for listening. Thanks for hanging out. I'll talk to you tomorrow in episode 56. It won't really be tomorrow. I'm going to record it right now, and I'm going to release them back to back. So maybe you listen to them one a day, then it will be tomorrow. Goodbye.